I remember thinking that wine had no business being on the table when papers were waiting for my signature. At 74, after a stroke and months of learning how to trust my own hands again, I had learned to be careful with small things. Pens, stares, words. Wine blurred all three. Still, my daughter-in-law smiled as she poured it, slow and patient, as if this were not the moment where my life could quietly change direction without asking me. The table was set like a family celebration. Linen napkins. A vase with flowers I didn't recognize, probably delivered that morning. The documents were stacked neatly at my place, clipped together, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paper. I sat straight, both feet on the floor, my left hand resting on my thigh to keep it from trembling. I could sign my name. I had practiced. They all knew that. "Just to help you relax," she said, sliding the glass toward me. Her voice was warm, practiced, the kind people use with children and the elderly. I was both, in her eyes. My son stood by the window, pretending to check his phone. He hadn't looked at me once since I sat down. The nurse stood a little apart, near the counter. She was young, maybe 30, with tired eyes and sensible shoes. She had been assigned to me after I came home from the rehabilitation center. I hadn't asked for her to be here today. My daughter-in-law had. "For safety," she said. Everything was for safety lately. The lawyer had left 10 minutes earlier after explaining things too quickly and smiling too much. I hadn't stopped him. I told myself I would read the papers again. I told myself I had time. The wine was a deep red, expensive. I could smell it before I touched the glass. My daughter-in-law watched my hand, not my face. That's how I knew this wasn't kindness. Kind people look at your eyes. "You don't have to rush," she added, though her knee bounced slightly under the table. I lifted the glass. It felt heavier than it should have. My fingers were stiff, slow to obey. I thought of my late husband, of how he used to say that nothing important should ever be signed in a hurry or with a drink nearby. I almost laughed at the memory, but my throat stayed tight. The nurse shifted her weight. I noticed it without knowing why. "This is just a formality," my daughter-in-law said, tapping the papers with one manicured finger. "After everything you've been through, we just want to make things easier." Easier for whom? I wondered, as the wine hovered inches from my lips. That was when the nurse took a step forward. "If you enjoy the stories here, dear, you're welcome to join our Patreon. There you'll find exclusive tales that never appear on YouTube, and new stories come out earlier than anywhere else. The link is just below. We're waiting for you." After the stroke, everyone spoke to me more slowly, as if my ears had been damaged along with my right side. Doctors, neighbors, even my own son chose their words like they were afraid I might drop them. The truth was simpler. My mind was clear. It was my body that had betrayed me, turning ordinary movements into negotiations. I had spent 3 months in a rehabilitation center learning how to stand without swaying, how to button a blouse with fingers that no longer trusted each other. When they finally let me come home, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. Illness invites people in. Some come with help. Others come with ideas. My son, Daniel, started visiting more often then. Before that, he had been busy. Always busy. Work, traffic, deadlines. After the stroke, he suddenly had time. He brought groceries I hadn't asked for and spoke about my health like it was a shared project. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, came with lists. Doctors to see. Medications to organize. Just in case, plans. At first, I was grateful. I won't pretend otherwise. Loneliness makes you soft. You confuse attention with care. When Melissa rearranged my kitchen so I wouldn't have to reach high shelves, I thanked her. When she insisted on managing my appointments, I let her. I told myself this was what family did when you became fragile. The nurse arrived 2 weeks later. Her name was Hannah. She didn't talk much at first. She watched. How I walked from the bedroom to the kitchen. How I held a cup. How long it took me to answer questions. She never finished my sentences for me, which I noticed and appreciated. Melissa, on the other hand, filled every silence. She spoke of responsibility, of the future, of how confusing finances could be at my age. She never said I was incapable. She didn't have to. Her tone did the work for her. The first time she mentioned paperwork was over soup. Chicken, slightly overcooked. It would just make things simpler, she said casually. If something happens again. Something. As if strokes were weather. Daniel nodded, eyes on his bowl. He had always avoided conflict. As a boy, he hid behind doors when voices rose. As a man, he hid behind agreement. I saw it then, clearer than ever. If there was a choice to be made, he would let someone else make it. Weeks passed. The papers appeared gradually, first as a suggestion, then as an appointment, then as a neat stack on my dining table, accompanied by wine I hadn't asked for. I told myself I would read everything carefully. I told myself I would ask questions. But pressure doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes wrapped in smiles and the word family. Hannah was the only one who never told me what was best for me. She asked how I felt. That day, as I sat at the table with the pen waiting and the wine gleaming darkly in its glass, she looked at my hand the way a professional does, not with pity, with attention. And attention, I was beginning to understand, was the rarest form of care. Melissa had a way of standing that always made her look like she was about to leave, even when she had no intention of going anywhere. One foot angled toward the door, shoulders relaxed, smile ready. It gave her control over the room. You spoke faster when she was near, afraid to waste her time. She was 52, 5 years younger than my son, and proud of how well she was aging. She dressed carefully, not extravagantly, but with purpose. Nothing soft, no loose edges. Even her cardigans looked strategic. When she touched my arm, it was brief, light, always in public view. Enough to signal affection, never enough to invite it back. She called me Mom in front of other people. When we were alone, she used my first name. I noticed the difference early on and told myself it didn't matter. I had learned over the years to accept small discomforts in exchange for peace. Melissa spoke often about stress, about how hard it was to juggle work and family, how Daniel worried but didn't like to show it, how everything would be easier if things were more organized. That word again, organized. It sounded harmless, responsible, almost loving. She never raised her voice. She never demanded. She suggested, repeatedly, gently, like water wearing down stone. You shouldn't have to think about these things anymore, she said once, while flipping through my mail without asking. You've done enough. Enough. The word landed heavy, as if there was a quota on living independently. Daniel sat beside her, nodding, his hands folded like he was waiting for instructions. He had always been like that. As a child, he brought me permission slips instead of opinions. As an adult, he brought me Melissa's ideas and called them decisions. When I asked questions, Melissa answered quickly, confidently, often before the lawyer had a chance. She spoke the language of paperwork fluently. Clauses, safeguards, temporary measures. She never explained consequences unless I asked directly, and even then, she softened them until they sounded theoretical. "You trust us, don't you?" she asked once, not accusing, just curious. Trust is a dangerous thing at my age. You've seen enough to know it can be used against you, but you're tired of guarding it. That afternoon, she positioned the papers carefully, aligning the edges with the table, placing the pen exactly where my right hand would naturally fall. She poured the wine without asking. A generous pour. Celebratory. Daniel finally looked at me then, just for a second. His eyes flicked to the pen, then away. He smiled, small and tight. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of," he said. I wanted to ask who would take care of me if I said no, but I didn't. Old habits die slowly. Hannah cleared her throat softly from across the room. Not loud enough to interrupt, just enough to be noticed. Melissa's smile faltered for half a second before returning. "Everything all right?" Melissa asked her. Hannah nodded. "I just want to make sure she's not feeling rushed." The word hung there. Rushed. For the first time that day, I felt seen. Daniel had always been easier to read when he was silent. When he spoke, he borrowed other people's words. When he was quiet, his discomfort showed in the way his shoulders curved inward, as if he were trying to take up less space in the room. That afternoon, he sat across from me with his hands folded on the table, eyes lowered. The picture of a reasonable man waiting for things to resolve themselves. He was 48 and already tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Life had worn him down gently but persistently. He worked, he paid bills, he did what was expected of him. Initiative had never been his strength. He chose paths that required the least resistance, and Melissa was very good at clearing those paths for him. After my stroke, he spoke often about worry, not in detail, just the word. "I worry about you, Mom." He never said what he worried about, exactly. Falls, money, loneliness. It all blended together into a general sense that something needed to be done, and that something usually came with paperwork. I don't believe Daniel ever sat down and decided to take something from me. That would require a kind of cruelty he didn't possess. What he did instead was allow it. He allowed Melissa to frame decisions, allowed lawyers to simplify explanations, allowed urgency to replace consent. When I asked him quietly, a few weeks earlier, what would happen if I didn't sign, he shrugged. "It would just be harder," he said, "for everyone." Everyone, not me. He loved me in the way some people love old furniture, with attachment, with familiarity, but also with the assumption that it might need to be moved, adjusted, or replaced if it stopped being convenient. That day, when Melissa's smile tightened at Hannah's comment about rushing, Daniel's jaw clenched. He didn't intervene. He never did. He waited for the moment to pass, like he always had. I thought back to his childhood, to the times I had smoothed things over for him, the teacher conferences, the missed deadlines. I had stepped in then, too, believing I was helping. Now, watching him defer again, I wondered how much of this moment had been shaped by my own choices decades earlier. The pen lay between us, glossy and black, heavier than it looked. My name waited at the bottom of several pages. My full name. The one I'd used to open accounts, to sign deeds, to bury my husband. I had earned the right to that signature. Daniel cleared his throat. "If you're tired, we can do this another day," he said finally. Melissa turned her head slowly toward him, her expression still pleasant, but her eyes sharp. "There's no need to delay," she replied. "We've already arranged everything." Arranged. Again that word. I looked at my son then, really looked at him. He met my gaze for a fraction of a second before looking away. That told me more than any argument could. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting the plan. Hannah moved closer to the table, her footsteps quiet. She didn't speak yet. She watched my face, then my hand, then the glass of wine, untouched. "Mrs. Carter," she said gently, using my last name the way professionals do when they mean respect. "How are you feeling right now?" It was a simple question. No agenda, no suggestion. I opened my mouth to answer, and for the first time that day, the room felt still. Hannah didn't wait for permission to pull out a chair. She sat beside me, not too close, not too far, placing herself where I wouldn't have to turn my head to see her. It was a small thing, but after months of being maneuvered, adjusted, guided, it mattered that someone chose my comfort over the room's arrangement. "I'm fine," I said out of habit. Years of doctors had trained that word into me. Fine meant manageable. Fine meant don't fuss. Hannah didn't accept it. She nodded, as if she'd heard me, but her eyes stayed on my face. "Your hand looks tense," she said calmly, "and you haven't had much water today." Melissa laughed lightly. "She's just nervous. Big decisions do that to people." Big decisions, made small by repetition. Hannah stood and went to the kitchen without asking. She returned with a glass of water and placed it in front of me, gently sliding the wine aside. "Let's switch for a moment," she said. Not a question, not an order, a suggestion framed as care. Melissa's smile thinned. "She can drink wine if she wants. She's not a child." "No," Hannah agreed quietly, "but she is my patient today." The word patient changed the air. It reminded everyone why Hannah was there. Not as decoration, not as reassurance, as a professional. Daniel shifted in his seat. "Is there a problem?" he asked, though his tone suggested he hoped there wasn't. Hannah folded her hands. "I need to document that Mrs. Carter is fully alert, not under pressure, and understands what she's signing. Alcohol complicates that." "It's one glass," Melissa said, sharper now. "This is unnecessary." "Maybe," Hannah replied, "but it's still my responsibility." Responsibility? The word landed differently coming from her. I took a sip of water. My throat loosened slightly. I hadn't realized how dry it was. The pen no longer felt urgent. The papers stayed where they were. Hannah turned to me. "You can take as much time as you need," she said. "If you want, we can stop for today." Melissa's knee stopped bouncing. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. For the first time, she looked at Hannah directly, assessing her not as help, but as an obstacle. "We've already scheduled this," she said. "Delaying will cause complications." Hannah nodded. "Then those complications can be addressed later." My concern is her well-being right now. No raised voices, no drama, just a quiet refusal to be rushed. I felt something shift inside me then. Not courage exactly, clarity, the sense that I was no longer alone at the table. "I am tired," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "And I don't want to sign anything today." Daniel inhaled sharply. Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it again. Hannah smiled at me, small and professional. "That's perfectly reasonable." I leaned back in my chair, my hand no longer reaching for the pen. The papers stayed unsigned. The wine remained untouched. And in that simple pause, I began to understand that help doesn't always come from family. Sometimes it comes from someone who is willing to say no on your behalf when you're still finding the strength to say it yourself. That evening, after they left, the house felt different. Not quieter. It was always quiet, but clearer, as if the air had been stirred and finally settled. The papers were gone. Melissa had gathered them quickly, too quickly, her movements sharp as she slid them back into the folder. She kissed my cheek before leaving, her lips cool and impersonal. Daniel followed, apologizing without words, the way he always did. Hannah stayed. She didn't make a show of it. She simply checked my blood pressure, asked me to walk with her to the kitchen and back, noted things in her tablet. Normal tasks, steady, grounding. "You did well," she said eventually, as she put her things away. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "I just stopped." "That's often the hardest part," she said. The next morning, she arrived earlier than usual. There was no family with her this time, no flowers, no wine, just her and the quiet routines of care. While I ate my oatmeal, she asked if I remembered what the papers were for. I hesitated. That alone told me something. "Power of attorney," I said slowly, "and changes." "To your will?" she asked gently. "Yes." "Did anyone explain what those changes meant in practice?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. Images floated up instead of explanations. Melissa's finger tapping the page. The lawyer's smile. Daniel's shrug. "No," I said finally. "Not really." Hannah nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "Would you like to go over them with someone independent?" The word independent sounded like oxygen. She helped me make an appointment with a different lawyer, one she didn't know personally, but whose name came from a list the hospital provided for patients in recovery. "Just to understand," she said. "No pressure." Daniel didn't like that. He called that afternoon, his voice tight. "Why are you involving outsiders?" he asked. "We're your family." "I know," I said. "That's why I want to understand." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Melissa is just trying to help." "So is Hannah," I replied. He had no answer to that. The lawyer's office smelled of old books and lemon cleaner. I liked that. He spoke slowly, asked me questions, instead of telling me what I should want. He explained what the documents would have done if I had signed them that day. I would have lost control of my accounts. Not immediately. Gradually. Decisions would be made in my best interest. My house could have been sold if it was deemed impractical. My consent would have become a formality. I sat there listening, my hands folded, my heart steady. I wasn't angry. I was alert. "I see this often," the lawyer said, not unkindly. "It usually starts with concern, then convenience takes over." On the way home, Hannah drove slowly, careful with turns. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say anything at all until we were parked. "You're not helpless," she said then. "You were just surrounded." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The documents remained unsigned. New ones began to take shape instead. Ones that protected me without erasing me. Ones that required my voice, not just my name. And every time doubt crept in, I remembered the weight of that pen, the smell of wine that didn't belong there, and the calm, steady presence of a nurse who noticed what others hoped I wouldn't. The wine came back a week later, which told me everything I needed to know. Not the same bottle, but the same idea. Melissa had learned that pushing too hard all at once didn't work, so now she moved in smaller steps, like someone testing ice before walking across it. She arrived in the afternoon, cheerful, carrying a paper bag with a logo from a local wine shop. "I thought we could just sit," she said. No paperwork today. Just talk. Talk had become her favorite word. It sounded harmless, almost generous. Hannah was in the kitchen, washing her hands. She gave me a brief look, not warning, not approval, just awareness. That was her way. Melissa poured the wine into 2 glasses this time, setting one in front of me, one for herself. She didn't mention relaxation or stress. She spoke about memories instead, about family dinners, about how lonely it must feel to lose independence so suddenly. She spoke softly, letting pauses do the work. I didn't touch the glass. You know, she said, lowering herself into the chair across from me. Daniel worries that you don't trust us anymore. I looked at her face as she said it. Calm, concerned, not accusing. It was well done. I trust people who explain things to me, I replied. She smiled. That's fair. The wine sat between us, red and still. I could smell it again, richer than before. My hand rested near the stem without reaching. I was learning myself, slowly. Melissa leaned back. The lawyer you saw filled your head with worst-case scenarios, she said lightly. They always do. It's how they justify their fees. Or maybe, I said, it's how they make sure I understand. Her eyes flicked to Hannah's back for just a second. She had noticed her presence the way one notices a locked door. Daniel arrived late, breathless, apologetic. He kissed my cheek, then glanced at the wine. You having a drink? He asked, hopeful. No, I said. Something tightened in his face. Disappointment, maybe. Or inconvenience. Melissa stood and refilled Daniel's glass instead. She talked about schedules, about how exhausting it was to coordinate care, about how nice it would be if things were simpler. Again, with that word. Simpler. As she spoke, Hannah came to the table and picked up the wine glass in front of me. She sniffed it lightly, professionally, then looked at Melissa. Did you give this to her? She asked. It's wine, Melissa replied. She's allowed. Hannah nodded. Yes, but earlier today, her blood pressure was unstable. Alcohol isn't recommended. Daniel frowned. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Maybe, Hannah said, but that's my job. Melissa laughed, but it came out thin. We're not trying to poison her. I know, Hannah said calmly, but intention doesn't cancel effect. She took the glass and poured the wine into the sink. Red disappeared down the drain, silent and final. For a moment, no one spoke. I watched Melissa's face change. Not dramatically, just enough. The warmth slipped. The calculation showed through. She had lost control of the moment, and she knew it. That was unnecessary, she said. So was the pressure, Hannah replied. Daniel looked from one woman to the other, caught between loyalty and convenience. He chose silence. I felt something settle inside me then. A quiet certainty. The wine had never been about taste. It was about timing, about dulling edges, about making signatures easier. Hannah handed me a fresh glass of water. You're doing fine, she said softly. I wrapped my fingers around it. Cool, clear, real. That night, after they left, I thought about how easily my life could have been poured away, slowly, politely, one glass at a time, and how close I had come to letting it happen simply because refusing felt rude. But dignity, I was learning, doesn't ask permission, and it certainly doesn't need wine. The signing was rescheduled for the following Friday, which told me they hadn't given up. People who retreat permanently don't set new dates. They regroup. Melissa called it a compromise. No wine this time, she said lightly over the phone. Just the documents and a quick visit from the lawyer. We'll do it properly. Properly is a flexible word. I had learned that too. Hannah asked me if I wanted her there. Not assumed. Asked. I said yes without hesitation. My voice didn't shake when I said it, which felt like progress. That afternoon, the table was cleared of decorations. No flowers, no linen napkins. The papers sat alone, thicker than before. The lawyer returned, different one this time, younger, sharper, less friendly. He spoke faster. Efficiency, he called it. Melissa sat close to him. Daniel took his usual place near the window. Hannah stood behind my chair, one hand resting lightly on the back, not touching me, just present. They started explaining. Again. Power of attorney, limited this time. Temporary, they said. Safeguards added. I listened carefully, nodding when something made sense, asking when it didn't. Melissa answered first, as always. The lawyer followed her lead. My pen lay on the table, uncapped. Just sign here, the lawyer said eventually, tapping the page. And here. That was when Hannah leaned forward. Before she signs, she said calmly, I need to check something. Melissa's head snapped up. What now? Hannah didn't respond to the tone. She looked at me instead. Mrs. Carter, can you squeeze my fingers? I did. My grip was weaker than usual. I hadn't noticed until she noticed for me. Are you dizzy? She asked. I hesitated. The truth mattered now. A little. Melissa laughed, sharp. She's nervous. Anyone would be. Hannah took a step toward the table. And that's when it happened. She reached for the folder to move it out of the way while I rested. Her elbow brushed the edge of the table. The water glass tipped first. Then the pen rolled. And the wine glass, yes. Wine had returned quietly, unnoticed, slid and spilled across the papers. Red spread fast, ink-like, irreversible. For a second, no one moved. Melissa stood up so quickly, her chair scraped the floor. What did you do? She snapped. Hannah froze, eyes on the mess. I'm so sorry, she said immediately. Her voice was steady, but her hands were already reaching for napkins. That was my fault. The lawyer cursed under his breath. These copies are ruined, Melissa cut in. Her face had changed completely now. No warmth, no softness, just anger. Do you have any idea how important this is? Hannah looked at her, still kneeling, still blotting. Important enough to rush someone who isn't well? Daniel finally stepped forward. Everyone calm down. No one listened. Melissa rounded on Hannah. You're overstepping. This is family business. And this, Hannah said quietly, standing now, wine-stained papers in her hands, is a medical situation. The red had soaked through several pages. Signatures' lines blurred. Clauses unreadable. The lawyer shook his head. We'll have to reprint everything. Not today, I said. My voice cut through the room like a clean line. They all turned to me. Not today, I repeated, and maybe not at all. Melissa stared. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Hannah placed the ruined documents gently on the counter. She needs to lie down, she said. Her blood pressure is rising. No one argued this time. As they left, the lawyer irritated, Melissa silent with fury, Daniel trailing behind. I sat back and felt my heart slow. Later, Hannah apologized again, quietly, sincerely. You didn't ruin anything, I told her. You stopped it. She shook her head. It was an accident. I smiled for the first time that day. Some accidents save lives. The stain on the counter remained faintly pink even after we cleaned. I didn't mind. It reminded me that not all spills are mistakes. Some are interruptions. And sometimes, an interruption is exactly what keeps you from signing your life away. After that day, the house felt watched, not by people, but by possibility. Every sound seemed louder: the tick of the clock, the creak of the hallway floor. Even my own breathing when I lay down in the afternoon felt like something that needed monitoring. Hannah insisted I rest. She closed the curtains halfway, dimming the room without turning it into darkness. She checked my pressure twice, then once more, not because it was rising, but because she didn't trust calm that came too fast. "They won't come back today," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "I know," I replied. "They'll wait." Waiting was their skill. Pressure came later. That evening, Daniel called. Hannah was in the kitchen, deliberately out of earshot, though I knew she could hear enough. Daniel's voice was tight, controlled. "This has gone too far," he said. "Melissa is very upset." I said nothing. "You embarrassed her," he continued. "You embarrassed us." There it was. Not concern, not fear, embarrassment. The kind that stings worse than anger. "I didn't spill the wine," I said calmly. "That's not the point." "It is," I replied, "because if that wine hadn't spilled, I would have signed." Silence. "I wasn't ready," I went on, "and no one listened, except the nurse." "She's interfering," Daniel said. "This isn't her place." "It became her place when my health was used as leverage," I answered. He sighed, the way he always did when things didn't bend his way. "You're overthinking this." "No," I said. "I'm thinking clearly for the first time in months." He hung up shortly after, not angrily, quietly. Withdrawal was his punishment of choice. The next day, Hannah helped me draft a letter. Not dramatic, not accusatory, just a written statement refusing to sign any documents without independent legal counsel present and requesting all communication go through my attorney. "Paper creates distance," she said, "and distance creates safety." She was right. Melissa didn't respond for 2 days. When she did, it was a message, not a call. Controlled, polite, cold. She spoke of misunderstandings, of stress, of how hard this had been on everyone. She never mentioned the wine, or the rush, or the spill. Hannah read it with me, then handed the phone back. "You don't owe a reply," she said. That was new. The idea that silence could be mine. A week later, the lawyer I had chosen called, the one who spoke slowly. He confirmed what we had suspected. Melissa had already contacted another firm, asking how quickly control could be transferred for efficiency. Efficiency again. Always that word. I sat at the table afterward, hands folded, and felt something I hadn't felt since before the stroke. Anger. Clean. Focused. Useful. "They thought you were weak," Hannah said gently. "Illness makes people assume that." "I was weak," I replied. "Physically?" She shook her head. "You were recovering." There is a difference. One implies an ending. The other implies a process. That night, as Hannah packed up to leave, she paused at the door. "I need you to understand something," she said. "What I did that day, it could cost me. Families don't like interference." I looked at her, really looked at her. Tired eyes, straight spine, no drama. "Then why did you do it?" I asked. She smiled, small and tired. "Because if I hadn't, you wouldn't be sitting here deciding. You'd already be decided for." After she left, I sat alone in the quiet house and realized something important. They had tried to take my future politely, with smiles, with wine, with paperwork. And a nurse, a stranger, had spilled just enough to make it visible. I owed her more than thanks. I owed her my life as it still belonged to me. The next shift Hannah worked, she arrived with the same quiet routine as always, but something in her posture had changed. Not tension, readiness. Like a person who knows a line has been crossed and won't uncross itself. She checked my vitals, made tea, opened the windows just enough to let the air move. Then she sat across from me at the table where the papers had once waited. "Your attorney called me," she said. "He asked a few questions about that day." I nodded. I told him everything. She didn't look relieved or worried, just steady. Good. That afternoon, Daniel showed up unannounced. No Melissa. That alone told me this visit wasn't planned. It was damage control. He stood in the doorway like a guest who wasn't sure he'd be invited in. "You should have told me you were changing lawyers," he said once he sat down. "I did," I replied. "You just didn't hear it." He rubbed his face with both hands. He looked older than his years then, not tired, exposed. "This is turning into a mess," he said. "Melissa thinks you don't trust her." I waited. Silence had become one of my tools. "She's been under a lot of pressure," he added. "She's trying to protect us." The house, the finances, everything. From what? I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The truth was inconvenient. Hannah stood by the counter, charting, but she wasn't pretending not to listen. She never pretended. "I'm not confused, Daniel," I said. "I'm not frightened. I'm not incapable. And I will not be managed like a problem." His eyes flicked toward Hannah. "This shouldn't involve her." "It already does," I said. "Because she was the only one who stopped and asked how I felt." He swallowed. "You're choosing her over your own family?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I'm choosing myself." That was when he lost his temper. Not loudly. Quiet anger was more his style. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "If you don't sign something soon, things could get complicated. What if something happens again?" "There it is," I said softly. "Fear." He looked away. "Fear makes people careless," I continued. "It makes them rush. It makes them pour wine when they should pour water." Hannah looked up then. Daniel noticed. He flushed. "This is unfair," he muttered. "No," I said. What was unfair was assuming I wouldn't notice. He stood abruptly. "Melissa won't let this go." "I know," I said. "Neither will I." After he left, Hannah sat down across from me again. For the first time since she'd known me, she looked unsure. "They may file a complaint," she said. "Against me." "I expected that," I replied. "So did you." She nodded. "I need you to understand what that could mean." "I do," I said, "and I won't pretend I'm comfortable with it." We sat in silence for a moment. Then I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. My grip was steadier now than it had been weeks earlier. "You didn't take control away from me," I said. "You gave it back." Her eyes filled, just slightly. She blinked it away. 2 days later, the complaint came. Vague, professional language, words like over-involvement and boundary confusion. My attorney handled it. Hannah provided her notes, detailed, precise, unemotional. Facts have a way of standing their ground. In the weeks that followed, Melissa stopped calling. Daniel called less. When he did, he spoke carefully, as if testing each word for safety. The urgency was gone. So was the warmth. What remained was distance. I mourned that quietly. Not because I wanted things back the way they were, but because clarity often comes with loss. One evening, Hannah helped me walk to the end of the driveway and back. The air was cool. My steps were slow but deliberate. "You're getting stronger," she said. "So are you," I replied. She smiled. "I had to be." After she left, I sat by the window and thought about how close I had come to disappearing. Not physically, but legally, quietly, politely. And how a spilled glass of wine, a steady hand, and one woman's refusal to look away had stopped it. Some people save lives with grand gestures. Others do it by staying in the room when everyone else wants you small and silent. And I knew then that whatever came next, I would meet it standing. The letter from my attorney arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded once, heavy despite its thinness. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and felt that quiet tightening in my chest that comes when you know something final is about to be clarified. Hannah was there when I opened it. She didn't hover. She made tea, set it within reach, then sat across from me, waiting. The letter confirmed what we had already put in motion. All previous drafts were void. Any attempt to act on them would be challenged. New documents were being prepared, limited, specific, protective. No sweeping authority, no vague language, no room for interpretation disguised as concern. "You're safe," Hannah said after I finished reading. "For now," I replied. Safety, I had learned, wasn't permanent. It had to be maintained. That afternoon, Melissa came in person. No warning call, no smile. She didn't bring wine or flowers or food. She brought herself, stripped of polish, tight with restraint. Daniel followed her in, 2 steps behind, like someone hoping to stay out of range. "I think we should clear the air," Melissa said, sitting down without waiting to be invited. "This has gone far enough." Hannah stood near the doorway, not intruding, not retreating. "You filed a complaint against her," I said calmly. Melissa's lips pressed together. "We raised concerns." "You tried to remove her," I said, "because she wouldn't cooperate." "That's not fair," Daniel said quickly. "It's accurate," I replied. Melissa exhaled sharply. "You're letting paranoia guide you." Paranoia, a useful word when you want to dismiss experience. "I am letting information guide me," I said, "and advice from people who don't benefit from my compliance." She laughed once, short and humorless. "You think I want your money?" "I think you wanted control," I answered. "And you mistook my illness for permission." Daniel sat down heavily. He looked tired. Not guilty. Tired. As if this were an inconvenience dragging on longer than expected. "We were trying to protect you," he said. "No," I replied. "You were trying to manage uncertainty by eliminating my voice." Silence followed. Thick, uncomfortable. Melissa stood. "Then I suppose we're done here." "Yes," I said. "We are." She looked at Hannah then, really looked. "Enjoy it," she said quietly. "This won't last forever." Hannah met her gaze. "Neither does intimidation." After they left, I felt the tremor hit my hands. Not fear. Release. Confrontation always costs something, even when you're right. Hannah stayed until my breathing steadied. She didn't tell me I was brave. She didn't praise me. She just stayed. That night, I revised my will. I left things where they made sense. I added conditions, safeguards, clarity, not punishment, protection. I wasn't cutting people out. I was cutting ambiguity out. When I signed those papers, there was no wine on the table, just water, and my full attention. The following week, the agency cleared Hannah of any wrongdoing. The complaint dissolved under documentation and medical protocol. She didn't celebrate. She nodded once when she told me, as if this outcome had always been the point, not the victory. Daniel didn't call after that. Melissa sent a message, brief, formal, careful. She spoke of space, of time, of healing. I understood what she meant. She needed time to adjust to a world where I was not easily moved. One evening, as Hannah helped me fold laundry, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Older, yes, slower, but upright, present. I almost lost everything quietly, I said. She shook her head. You almost gave it away. There is a difference. One is theft. The other is exhaustion. I sat down, folded my hands, and felt the weight of weeks lift slightly from my chest. My life was still mine. Not because I fought loudly, but because I stopped being polite at the wrong moment. And that, at my age, felt like a kind of freedom I hadn't known I was allowed to claim. The silence that followed surprised me more than the confrontation had. I had expected fallout. Angry calls, demands, maybe tears. Instead, there was a stretch of days where no one asked anything of me at all. No questions about my health. No suggestions. No pressure disguised as concern. Just absence. At 74, absence feels different than it did when I was younger. It isn't freedom right away. First, it feels like an echo. You reach for a familiar sound and find only air. Daniel didn't call. Melissa didn't text. Even the polite, obligatory messages stopped. It was as if I had been moved, mentally, into a separate room and the door quietly closed. Hannah noticed it before I said anything. She always did. They're giving you space, she said one morning while helping me button my cardigan. They're regrouping, I replied. She didn't argue. A week later, Daniel came alone. Again. This time he called first. Progress, of a sort. He arrived without tension in his shoulders, which told me he wasn't here to fight. He sat down carefully, like a guest who knows the rules have changed. I didn't come to talk about documents, he said. That's good, I answered. I'm tired of paperwork pretending to be love. He flinched at that, but didn't deny it. I didn't handle things well, he said after a moment. I thought I was helping. You thought you were avoiding responsibility, I said gently. They're not the same. He nodded slowly. For the first time, I saw something close to understanding in his face. Not guilt, awareness. Melissa is angry, he admitted. She feels pushed out. She pushed herself, I said, when she forgot I was still here. He looked at his hands. She thinks Hannah turned you against us. No, I replied. Hannah reminded me to stay with myself. That seemed to settle somewhere in him. He didn't argue. I don't know how to fix this, he said finally. I looked at my son, my child even now, and felt the old instinct rise up. To soothe, to solve, to sacrifice a little comfort so he wouldn't feel lost. I let that instinct pass. You don't fix this by taking something, I said. You fix it by standing beside me without steering. He nodded. Whether he could do that, I didn't know. But for once, he wasn't asking me to make it easier for him. After he left, Hannah asked if I was all right. I am, I said. But I won't chase reconciliation. That's wise, she replied. Peace given under pressure doesn't last. The following days were quieter, but not empty. I began taking my walks again, slow loops down the block and back. My legs remembered more than I expected. Recovery is stubborn like that. It keeps going if you let it. I met my attorney once more to finalize everything. We reviewed each clause carefully. I asked questions. I took breaks. I signed only when I felt settled, not rushed. When it was done, he shook my hand. You did the right thing, he said. I didn't need reassurance, but I accepted it anyway. That evening, I sat alone at the same table where wine had once been poured too eagerly. I ran my fingers over the wood, feeling the small imperfections time had carved into it. Nothing in my life was smooth anymore, but it was solid. I thought about how easily age turns you into a project for other people, something to manage, simplify, quiet down, and how dangerous it is when love mixes with convenience. Hannah packed up her bag and paused at the door. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. "Yes," I replied, "and thank you." "For what?" she asked. "For not mistaking my slowness for surrender." She smiled, and then she was gone. I turned off the lights and stood there for a moment in the darkened room. My house, my name, my choices, all still intact. The cost had been distance. The reward was clarity. And at my age, clarity is worth more than comfort bought with silence. The consequences arrived quietly, the way real consequences usually do. Not with shouting or slammed doors, but with small, practical shifts that rearranged my days. The first was money, not loss, control. My accounts were reorganized under structures that required my direct approval. No automatic access, no helpful shortcuts. When the bank clerk spoke to me, she spoke to me, not to my son, on my behalf. I noticed how different that felt. Slower, yes, but solid. Ground under both feet. The second was care. Hannah's hours were adjusted, officially extended. It wasn't framed as protection from my family, but as support for my recovery. Words matter in documents. I made sure they did. The third was distance. Daniel stopped stopping by, just to check. When he did come, he asked before moving things, before offering advice, before speaking for me. It was awkward for him. I could see that. Restraint always is, at first. Melissa didn't come at all. At first, I told myself I didn't mind. Then I realized that wasn't true. I did mind. Not because I missed her presence, but because I was finally allowing myself to feel what her absence represented. A choice. A boundary I hadn't known how to set before. One afternoon, Hannah helped me sort through old files. Insurance papers, medical records, things that accumulate quietly over a lifetime. In the bottom drawer, we found a folder I hadn't opened in years. My handwriting on the tab was younger, sharper. "Just in case," it said. Inside were notes I had written after my husband died. Instructions, accounts, reminders to myself not to rush decisions when I was tired or grieving. I had forgotten I was ever that careful. "I used to trust myself more," I said. Hannah looked up. "You still can." That evening, Daniel called. Not to argue, not to persuade, just to talk. We spoke about ordinary things. The weather, his work, a repair he needed to make at home. It felt strangely formal, like two adults meeting on neutral ground. At the end of the call, he hesitated. "Melissa thinks you're punishing her," he said. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm protecting myself." He didn't respond right away. Then, "She doesn't know how to be around you if she can't manage things." "That's her problem," I said quietly. "Not my illness." After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. That was new. A week later, my attorney called with one last confirmation. Everything was finalized. Locked. Clear. He congratulated me. I thanked him, but what I felt wasn't pride. It was relief. The deep kind that settles into your bones. That night, I dreamed of my husband for the first time since the stroke. He didn't speak. He just stood beside me while I signed something, then nodded once. I woke with my heart calm. Hannah noticed the change in me before I did. "You're walking differently," she said during one of our slow laps around the living room. "More confident." "I know where I'm going again," I replied. She smiled. "That helps." There was one more thing to do, one final decision that had nothing to do with documents. I called my lawyer and asked him to prepare a separate letter. Not legal, personal. It wouldn't threaten or accuse. It would simply state the truth in plain language for anyone who needed to read it in the future. I dictated it slowly. I wrote that I was grateful for concern, but that concern without respect becomes control. That illness does not erase identity. That help is only help when it can be refused. That my love was not a currency and my silence was not consent. When it was done, I sealed it and placed it in the same drawer as my will. Not to be sent now, just to exist. Because one of the hardest lessons of aging is learning that clarity today is protection tomorrow. Late that evening, after Hannah left, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table. The same table, no papers, no pen, no one waiting. My hands were steady. I thought about how close I had come to disappearing into a role, dependent, managed, softened, until my edges no longer mattered, and how narrowly I had stepped back from it. People think resistance looks like shouting, like defiance, like drama. Sometimes it looks like an old woman choosing not to be polite when politeness would cost her everything. And that, I knew now, was not stubbornness. It was survival. The quiet stretched into weeks. Not the awkward quiet of waiting for something to explode, but a deeper one, steadier, like a lake after a storm has passed. Life resumed its smaller rhythms. Morning light through the kitchen window. The kettle's low whistle. Hannah's footsteps at the door, always the same tempo, never rushed. I began to notice myself again. How my body felt instead of how it was perceived. Which days my legs were stronger, which mornings my hands needed more patience. Recovery stopped being something supervised and became something lived. Daniel came by occasionally, always alone, always with a question before an action. "Is it okay if I fix this? Do you want help with that?" It was clumsy, but it was effort. I didn't praise him for it. Praise can undo progress if it comes too soon. I simply answered honestly. Melissa remained absent. At first, her absence felt sharp, like a deliberate silence meant to punish. Later, it softened into something else. Relief mixed with a distant ache. You don't share years of family life without feeling the echo when it stops. One afternoon, a mutual acquaintance called me. Careful voice. Neutral tone. She said Melissa had been telling people she was pushed out, that I had been turned against the family. I listened without interrupting. When the woman finished, I thanked her and hung up. I didn't feel the urge to defend myself. That surprised me most of all. I had spent decades explaining myself, my choices, my limits, my needs, smoothing things over so others would feel comfortable. Now, with my life finally back in my own hands, explanations felt optional. Hannah noticed the change too. "You're not bracing anymore," she said one morning while we sat on the porch, wrapped in light sweaters. "You used to hold yourself like something was about to hit." "And now?" I asked. "Now you're just sitting," she replied. It sounded simple. It wasn't. The complaint against Hannah never resurfaced, but its shadow lingered. She was more careful with language, more precise with documentation. Professional survival. I understood that kind of caution. Women like us learn it early. One evening, as she was getting ready to leave, she paused. "My supervisor offered me a transfer," she said. "Different case, fewer complications." My heart tightened. "Did you accept?" "No," she said. "Not yet." I waited. I didn't ask her to stay. That wouldn't be fair. "I won't leave you suddenly," she added. "But I want you to know, if I do go, it won't be because of regret." "I know," I said, and I meant it. The idea of her leaving stirred something uncomfortable in me. Not fear. Dependence is louder than that. This was something quieter. Gratitude mixed with loss. The knowledge that some people enter your life for a reason, not a lifetime. That night, alone in bed, I thought about how easily I could have confused Hannah's presence with rescue. But she hadn't rescued me. She had stood still long enough for me to stand up myself. That distinction mattered. Daniel called a few days later. His voice was different, not cautious, resolved. "Melissa and I are seeing a counselor," he said. "That's good," I replied. "She's angry," he continued, "but she's listening, a little." "I'm not interested in apologies," I said. "Only in change." "I know," he said. And for once, I believed him. After the call, I sat by the window and watched a woman across the street walking her dog. Slow steps, upright posture. No one guiding her. No one managing her pace. I realized how rarely we allow older women that image, autonomy, without explanation. Weeks passed. My strength returned in increments, not leaps. Hannah reduced her hours slightly, testing my independence the right way, by stepping back, not pulling away. The day I cooked a full meal by myself again, nothing dramatic happened. No applause, no announcement. Just me, stirring soup, steady on my feet, knowing I could stop if I needed to. That was enough. I thought about the signing that never happened, about how close I had come to being reshaped into something smaller, easier to handle, and how subtle that erasure would have been. No shouting, no force, just smiles, concern, and a glass of wine. People talk about survival like it's loud and visible. Sometimes it's an older woman sitting quietly in her own house, still in possession of her name, her choices, and her future. And that kind of survival doesn't need witnesses, it just needs resolve. The last document I signed was not legal, it was medical. Hannah watched me read it line by line, glasses low on my nose, pen resting untouched until I finished. When I finally signed, she nodded once and closed the folder. "That's it," she said. "You're officially cleared for independent living." 74 years old, and I had just been declared capable of my own life. The irony didn't escape me. We didn't celebrate. We made tea, the ordinary kind. I drank it slowly, feeling the warmth travel down into places that still remembered fear. Outside, the afternoon was quiet. No cars, no voices, just the sound of a bird somewhere in the hedges, doing what it had always done without permission. Hannah stood by the door a little later, bag over her shoulder. This time, she hesitated. "I'll be transferred next month," she said. "Closer to my home." I nodded. I had known this was coming. People like her don't stay forever. They move where they're needed, then they move on. "You saved my life," I said. She shook her head immediately. "No, I interrupted something dangerous. You did the rest." "That interruption mattered," I replied. "More than you know." She smiled then, not professionally, not carefully, just human. She hugged me, brief, respectful, and left. The house didn't feel empty after she was gone. It felt complete. Daniel came by the following weekend. He looked different, not lighter exactly, more honest in his posture. He didn't bring plans or suggestions. He brought bread from a bakery and asked if I wanted company. We sat at the same table. No papers, no pens, no glasses of wine pretending to be kindness. "I'm learning something," he said after a while, "about how easy it is to confuse love with control." I didn't answer right away. Then, "Learning late is still learning." He nodded. We didn't fix everything that afternoon. We didn't need to. Repair, I've learned, doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Melissa didn't come. She sent a message later, polite, distant, accepting my boundaries without embracing them. That was enough. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just reality. And reality, when it's honest, is a gift. That evening, I took out the old photograph of my husband. I set it on the table and sat across from it, the way I sometimes still do. I told him everything: the wine, the papers, the nurse, the spill, the line I didn't cross. I stayed, I said aloud. I stayed myself. The woman looking back at me from the darkened window glass was older than the one who had almost signed her life away, slower, lined, but she was solid, present, undiminished. Here is what I know now, and I know it without bitterness. People will call it care when they want access. They will call it concern when they want compliance. They will bring wine when clarity would stop you. And if you have been taught all your life to be agreeable, you might mistake silence for safety. Don't. If your body is slower, that does not mean your voice is gone. If your hands shake, that does not mean your will is weak. If you are tired, that does not mean you are ready to disappear. Sometimes the bravest thing an older woman does is refuse to rush, refuse to sign, refuse to be polite at the wrong moment. A spilled glass saved my life, but only because someone was brave enough to knock it over, and I was brave enough to stop reaching for the pen. If this story feels close to you, don't scroll past it. Share it. Talk about it. Let other women know they're allowed to stop, to question, to say no. Even late in life, especially late in life.